Hey guys, super excited for this episode. As always, I remember being in my early 20s, making the decision that I needed to be more assertive, to learn how to stand up for myself without being too aggressive. And it felt like it made individual encounters go more smoothly, but overall, my situation never really seemed to change much. I'd have respectful conversations with my boss or stand up to someone trying to push me around, but at the end of the day, those people still got special treatment, and the boss still failed to recognize my work ethic, brilliance, or unmatched intellectual superiority. Not only that, but even though I've always had performance based jobs, competing with others in the workplace seemed to leave me on shaky ground. And it wasn't just that I wasn't likable. I mean, sure, maybe a few times I inadvertently showed my genius, which obviously intimidated everyone around me. It did take a while to learn the importance of keeping that sort of thing hidden so as not to alarm the villagers, but it was more than that. And it took a long time to figure it out. So I'd like to try to save you the frustration of trial and error. So why does it seem like standing up for yourself so often backfires? Well, for starters, you're probably confusing moral certainty with strategic advantage. So your response is a reaction to the feeling of disrespect aimed at relieving an emotional pressure rather than a surgical strike that accounts for the structure of the situation. I know that was a little wordy. Let me break it down with an easy to understand example. We just had the Super Bowl this last week, and I don't care about football, but I'll use it for this example. You may be familiar with the term Hail Mary, which is a prayer, but it was also the name of a very famous football play. It's a crazy, long shot, last-ditch effort that basically had a very low chance of working. So you want to add a little extra prayer. Throwing a Hail Mary is taking a long shot. Now, when you have seconds left on the clock and all you have is that 1 in a million chance, then yeah, you should go for it. However, that's in the final seconds of the game. In general, that's not a good way to play. Normally, you're focused on incrementally moving the ball closer and closer to the opponent's goalpost and gaining ground, positioning your team to maximize the chances of them scoring, stuff like that. The underlying concept of that idea applies to any sport. It applies to chess, it applies to your office, and most people argue with Hail Marys that never really land. Then they get annoyed and end up with a penalty because they started a fight with another player on the field, or because they were so emotional from a perceived offense that they got tunnel visioned on their strategy and ended up breaking the rules. That's very different from someone who approaches power struggles and social dynamics from the mindset of a positional player, someone who's aware of the bigger picture, who doesn't just react to situations, but understands what's going on beneath the surface and is able to leverage the technicalities of the sport to his or her advantage. Instead of trying to control others through sheer willpower, they're intentional and act with surgical precision rather than brute force. Because aggression without position doesn't assert power, it exposes you. When you lash out to try to stand up for yourself from a sense of justice in an unjust world, there's just no telling what kind of unintended consequences you're going to stir up. You'll walk away thinking life is unfair and there's no point trying to be a good person, when in reality, you're just being punished for breaking the laws of strategy that you didn't know were there. And the first principle to understand is that power isn't volume, it's self-control. The OG fans of this show already know that one of the quotes I live by, which I learned from a Marine Corps colonel, is that the greatest test of manliness is self-control. It also happens to be the master key to just about everything else as well. In order to become a formidable long-term player, you have to learn to act rationally despite how you might feel. There's just no way around it. One of the many benefits of self-control is that instead of responding impulsively, you're able to take a step back and see things a little more clearly. The emotions fade and you can think logically in longer time frames. You'll also start to notice how reactive everyone else is, and more importantly, what their knee-jerk response reveals about their character and motivations. If you make a habit of studying people, eventually you start seeing things on a more advanced scale. So instead of being stuck in the nuance of day-to-day tactics, your view expands to the larger strategic level. And that's the difference between winning an argument versus arranging the playing field, the battlefield, so that they don't even have a chance to fight, or if they do, it's not a fair fight. Winning an argument is about proving a point. Arranging the battlefield is about making your point the only rational conclusion. When you understand structure, you stop asking, how do I respond? And start asking, well, how did the situation get built and how do I redesign it? That's when conflict becomes predictable, and predictable games are winnable. Nobody cares if you feel slighted. You get no sympathy for being victimized by an unjust system. Whining about it does no good for you either. Trying to outshine the parasites who latch on to anyone they think can feed them usually just means that your efforts end up in their wallet. And I've seen people waste their lives and an unbelievable amount of personal time being stressed and angry over how unfair it is that they work so hard and do things the right way, but these parasites outmaneuver them at every turn. I don't want you to be either of those people. You do need to be the best that you can. I don't want you manipulating your way up the ladder. I just also don't want you working yourself to death just to get outplayed by the snakes who do. And the quote I go by on this is to be as shrewd as serpents and as innocent as doves. In other words, don't be a predator. Like, don't get around by crushing the life out of the unsuspecting, but also you've got to stop being naive. People are out to get you, for sure. The best predators are also masters of camouflage. Like, you don't see a tiger or a shark until it's too late. You also are the most susceptible to the individuals who convince you that they're your friends. Unfortunately, this also applies to dating. You need to learn to see the chessboard clearly and to not complain about losing when you haven't even studied the rules. And you're just insisting that life should be the way you think it should, and that people should act according to your morals and your beliefs. Like, if you don't understand how to negotiate or play politics, don't take it personally when you don't get promoted. I understand that it stings, I've been through that, but your best move is to take the experience as feedback and figure out what to do next. Obviously, your qualifications weren't what they were actually looking for. So maybe what you think about success isn't quite right. Always remember to, one, verify the incentive, not the persona. However you feel about the person, you need to treat it like your favorite detective show and establish motive. What do they stand to lose if you assert yourself? What do they stand to gain if you keep quiet? What do they gain through the status quo? At the end of the day, people are very predictable when you properly factor in incentives. Also, never confuse emotional intensity with bargaining power. Just because you really think things should be a certain way doesn't mean anyone else will, especially if they see you as a threat to their current position. Whether positive or negative, people are resistant to change. So even someone who's not necessarily against you could become a default opposition just because you're trying to change things. Also, I'll reiterate something I learned very early on. People are cowards. They don't want confrontation. They're scared of stirring up real trouble, especially when their position, culture, or identity is built around being likable or even being a good person. They don't want to offend anyone. And probably the biggest mistake is proxy misidentification, which is a very common mistake. Even near geniuses like me occasionally slip up. But it's basically attacking the visible antagonist instead of the real instigator. Like how everyone gets super invested in their favorite politician being elected president. But behind the scenes, the people really calling the shots are the ones with obscene amounts of money, and you don't know their names. They never come under attack because no one knows who they are, and they use other people as pawns for that reason. If you saw Batman Begins, you went through the whole movie thinking that Bruce Wayne killed the supervillain in the first act. But then at the end, plot twist, that guy was just a figurehead. He was carrying the title so that he would be the target. Meanwhile, the real villain was masquerading as one of the administrators. Now, I'm not saying I'm Batman, but I would point out that no one's ever seen me and Batman in a room at the same time. Just saying. Anyway, manipulators operate through buffers. Pawns absorb blame and take the heat, acting as a shield for consequences of any mistakes that may occur. And this should make sense because, one of the things that manipulative people do is they use others to get their work done. I think I read a book on Chinese strategy, and they called it killing with a borrowed knife. Like you take the weapon that you're going to do the deed with from somebody else. And in a human aspect, you're getting someone else to do the thing that is going to get them caught, and they're the murder weapon basically. So you should be on the lookout for that and for other people acting on someone else's behalf. Confronting a proxy like that can actually backfire because forcing an open battle where deception has been the name of the game is challenging, especially when you're fighting the wrong person. You've got to be able to prove a lot, or everyone's going to reject your theory just because they don't want to believe that they got taken advantage of, or you'll look crazy or like a douchebag. It also may give people a common enemy. It reveals your hand and is challenging in general because you have to cut through layers and layers of plausible deniability. You've heard to never ascribe to malice what can be explained by incompetence, but I'm starting to feel like that's just wishful thinking. What looks like incompetence often ends up being complicity. Remember that weak players express, strong players constrain, and this is you. I don't want you to just go out there trying to assert yourself and I feel things should be this way and I want justice and fairness. Like, that's expression, that's just relieving an emotional strain. It doesn't do anything for you. You need to be strategic and tactful. You learn to control yourself, to think strategically, and to position yourself for success before trying to force the battle. The need to demand justice will only make you a target in a room full of conspirators. If you notice, the loudest person can often seem untouchable, but that's really just because, again, most people are cowards and are easy to push around. But when you force the loudest person to step outside of a verbal jousting match, they typically don't have any real strategy. That's true of most people, which means that if you learn even a little bit, like what I'm teaching you here and what's going to be coming up in the episodes down the road, you're going to be ahead of 80% of your competition. Lastly, let's look at victimhood as a defensive asset. Playing the victim isn't necessarily weakness. It can also be insurance. Like, it reverses moral pressure, invites third-party protection, and justifies sacrificial moves, which sacrificing a subordinate to preserve power is a classic containment maneuver. You can learn in two ways. Rockefeller said, "My enemies have made me smart," and I really like that quote a lot. It's simple, but it has a lot of weight to it. What he means is that going up against strong players gives you an opportunity to learn how they think. This enables you, one, to take preventive measures, but also sometimes you can learn strategies that you can use too. I'm not a fan of playing victim from a pride standpoint, but you've got to admit it can be pretty effective, especially against overly sympathetic people. You don't want to win a battle and conquer this situation at the expense of ruining your reputation, turning people against you, and things like that. You want other people to like you as much as possible. It's not always possible, but if it's a good bonus. It helps a lot. Therefore, the safest attack is the one that doesn't look like an attack. Even the tyrannical, power-hungry types like Stalin or Ivan the Terrible didn't start out that way. I mean, the signs were definitely there for Stalin, but he still kept some lid on it. I'm not suggesting that you become like these men or that you make them your role models. I hope that's obvious, but I am pointing out that they're worth studying because you're gonna run into people who are like that and use comparable strategies and maybe just don't have the same resources that they do. The same in your day-to-day. That coworker who's bullying you is not gonna be the last. Sorry to break it to you. The boss who won't promote you due to personal dislike isn't going to be the only one. The mistake is thinking that if you stomp your foot and demand fairness, that things will somehow magically change. But that's just not how life works. You don't have to stoop to anyone's level to beat them, but if you refuse to learn the rules governing power games, you're going to lose. The same as if you enter a chess tournament not understanding how the pieces move. So how do you understand these rules? Well, one, study history. Look at powerful people and find the patterns, especially people who started at the bottom and worked their way up. Two, carefully observe the people around you. Every single interaction is a window into how people think. But remember, don't take anything at face value. You're tired of the superficial small talk and BS, the meaningless phrases that they hide behind that conceals nothing but confusion. Watch what people do. Notice what they get from their decisions and you'll find patterns. Three, listen to psychology hacks and consider subscribing to my email list. I've done a lot of the heavy lifting for you so you can just weigh what I say against your experience and hopefully see things that took me a couple years to figure out. And I'm definitely not always right, but I am always sincere. Don't forget to share this episode with someone you think needs to hear it. And don't hesitate to reach out on socials for any questions or input that you may have. Also, if you're listening on Spotify, it would mean a lot to me if you headed over to YouTube and followed me on there. I don't know what's wrong with that channel. The algorithm hates me and every other excuse that people give. I've had a lot of success on other platforms. For some reason, YouTube just will not budge. I don't know why, but if I can break into that market, that would be awesome. So if you guys just log in there, subscribe, share, like, whatever. Really appreciate it. Stay tuned for more. See you guys soon.